Afternoon, everybody. We're just waiting for a few more people to be let in the waiting room. Hope the waiting room was adequate and the coffee was good and the magazines were up to date.
I think I was in the wrong waiting room.
Oh,
there.
sorry, Ken. You got the wrong meeting.
Probably the wrong meeting as well, yeah.
Okay, well, I think we'll start. I know it's only just 12 o'clock, isn't it? Maybe we'll wait one more minute or so. Thanks to all of you for being on time and efficient. Hi, Mike. It's always good to have you here. You're a great supporter, and Mike Johnson and Mike McCabe, always at our webinars. Thank you so much for your support. Okay, I think I'll start. Hope you can all hear me okay. My name is Claire Fincham. I'm the marketing director at SAPIX in Upavon. And I just wanted to take a minute to just give you some context about why SAPIX is getting involved in SMEs and what our intention is. And then I'm going to hand over to Hayley, who will introduce our speaker, Candice Chetty, and then we'll run the webinar. SAPIX, at the beginning of last year, found that there was a need for small and medium businesses to have some support in terms of their supply chain and operations needs. So that was covering a wide range from planning, forecasting, inventory, distribution, reverse logistics, and all the elements and pillars of supply chain management. And we realized that in the South African context, there's a lot of support for small businesses with HR issues, with financial support, and those kinds of things. And we just found that in this area, there wasn't a lot of support in assisting businesses and finding solutions to their supply chain and operations needs and issues. So we put together a series of webinars last year to help small businesses come up with some really practical ways in which to run that part of their business. And if you are a small business on this webinar, take the time to have a look at our website and go onto our YouTube channel and revisit those webinars, because they are brilliantly done by Ken and Greta in terms of content and delivery. We've also had some other case studies. Other people talk to us about how they've pivoted from working in the public sector space in supply chain management to having their own businesses. So what we're really trying to do is, through our networks and our own skills and our brilliant mentors and clever people that are on our supply chain small business hub committee, to assist small businesses with their operations and supply chain needs. We have a membership package specifically for these types of organizations, and we can also offer some training. On the other side of the coin, we also would like to assist large corporates with their enterprise and supplier development needs. And if they identify 10 or 20 suppliers who they think would benefit from being part of the SAPIX community in terms of membership, we're appealing to those corporates to come on board and invest in their suppliers by paying for membership of SAPIX. And in turn, those suppliers will benefit from the operations and supply chain learnings that we are offering. So that's really why we're in business. I'll put the link of the business hub on the chat so that you can have a look at that after the webinar. And then it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Hayley, who is on our Small Business Hub committee. She's a long-standing and stalwart supporter of SAPIX, and I'm very grateful to her for all the time and support that she gives the organization in a volunteer capacity. So I'll hand over to you, Hayley. Thank you so much. And thanks all of you for being with us. Please feel free to interact on the chat. Hayley will tell you how it's all going to work, and to let you know that we are recording this webinar and we will be sharing the recordings with the delegates who have attended. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Claire. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We've got a very special lady with us. Candice Chetty, who I have the warm pleasure of actually introducing. Candice Chetty is an owner and an MD of EAZI Enterprise Business Solutions in South Africa. And Candice, after having spent 14 years in corporate, gaining extensive knowledge in the fields of finance and risk management. Candice also ventured into her own consulting company for the past 2 years, 2.5, sorry. She's been offering an array of business solutions, particularly specializing in systems and process risk. I'm sure there's been a lot of questions about risk currently. Candice has also held the position of financial manager at JSE-listed companies for many years and was the general manager of a reputable risk company before opening up her own business. She holds a B Comm Accounting Degree and is ISO 31000 accredited. She is also a certified member of SAIT and sits on the Board of Trustees for Faith Walkers. She is involved in a lot of pro bono work for NPOs and is currently involved in partnering with a company that is investing its resources into mentoring and upskilling previously disadvantaged females. She is also one of our SAPEX mentors. She also believes that her experience, together with her innovative system development, is highly effective in identifying and mitigating risks while creating a sustainable risk culture in business. Candice is also a mother of 2 and strongly believes in the balance of work and family and attributes all her success to her faith in God. So Candice, over to you. Thank you for agreeing to be a speaker on our webinar and for the Small Business Hub to be able to support all our small business ventures. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayley. That was quite an extensive write-up, and sometimes it's difficult to hear things about yourself, but I'm very humbled and honored to be on this platform. And thank you to SAPEX. They have an amazing team, one of the best teams I've worked with, and I'm very privileged to be part of this team. And thank you to everybody of taking time off on your Friday afternoon when you should be sitting at the beach sipping some wine, but you're here listening to me. But I'm sure we've have an amazing time together and learn something. So at the start of it, I want to say that I am no supply chain expert, but I do have quite an extensive background, as Hayley said, in terms of risk management and looking at systems and processes. So hopefully we can glean something together. I am going to be running a PowerPoint, which Hayley, we can share at the end of it. There's some notes in it, but I really want to talk overview today because we only have an hour, and I think Hayley will take any questions that are coming off on the chat, which we can hopefully get through within the hour. So let me just start sharing my screen and then we can begin. All right, so today's topic, we're looking at risk management through the lens of supply chain, and specifically this afternoon, I want to talk about OTIF. If those of you that don't know what OTIF is, it's on time in full. And basically, the whole process of a supply chain is really to meet our customer demand, that we meet what the customers asked us for. We've delivered on time, we've delivered in full. And in some instances, we can talk about OTIF-Q, which means I delivered on time, in full, in quality. And I think ultimately that's the place that we all want to get into. So there's a lot of notes on this slide, but I want to overview talk to you about risk. When we had the SAPEX conference last year, I briefly chatted about risk management, and it's becoming more and more evident that risk management is critical to every business. Previously, I found that you would have customers that would sort of force you in what industry you are to say, listen, you need to get some ISO accreditation or you need to comply to some industry regulation before you can supply me. So we were sort of getting ourselves into this risk management sort of culture because our customers wanted us to. But more and more I'm seeing, whether it's small, medium, or even blue chip companies, risk management is becoming critical. there's a lot of notes, extensive notes on what the ISO 31000 framework is. But basically what I want to touch in this is that it's merely, it's sort of intertwined into each part of the process, whether it's in supply chain, whether it's in HR, finance, or whatever it is into. At every point in the business, every employee must be trained and equipped to identify risks, to be able to measure those risks, to be able to manage, monitor, and report on those risks. And I want you to look at some of the notes here. I mean, the key word that's coming in here is the word manage. And I want us to know that it's sort of a very sensitive thing, because we tend to sort of have an ostrich mentality sometimes, is that, you know, I'm burying my head in the ground. I mean, I have clients that the bottom line looks healthy. So as long as the bottom line looks healthy, I don't need to look into the nitty-gritty of it. But really, you cannot manage what you cannot see. And so a big part of what I'm going to speak today is about transparency and what we can see, and how that will help us in the supply chain to ultimately manage and achieve our OTIF. You know, one of the principles I learned was this principle on valley site versus mountain site. And if you look at a picture of a valley, when you're in a valley, all you're seeing is what you are around you. So you're basically seeing yourself, and you're seeing whatever is around you in your space. But if you climb up and you go to a mountain, you're seeing everything from a holistic point of view. You can see all the other parts of it, and then you can make better decisions. And this is why I reiterate the fact that you cannot manage what you cannot see. And so we're going to spend a lot of time about managing what we can see. Haley, I'm not sure if there's anything that we want to delve into this sort of thing. Oh, this is one of the things I want to say is that, and I mentioned this to Haley when we chatted earlier this week, is that risk sort of makes people very nervous, that word, risk management. Because I think, and myself included, when we started developing risk frameworks or risk registers, sort of 10 years ago, I think, when I was a financial manager, you know, the initial thing is that if you have a risk in your business, you're not performing, and it's a threat to the business, it's something bad. And if someone identifies and does an external audit or an internal auditor comes up and you have a risk, that you're in trouble. But the definition of a risk is an uncertainty. So an uncertainty means I'm not fully aware of what's happening. It could, it couldn't, maybe, that sort of lingo. So a risk becomes a threat only if we don't identify it. That's why the first part of the risk framework is to identify. A risk can very easily be turned into an opportunity. I've had during COVID a colleague of mine that was in the medical industry, and he called me up and he said, I developed a disaster recovery model for the COVID time. And he said to me, Candice, your model has how risks can be turned into opportunity. We were actually thinking about whether we should close doors. But obviously, being in the medical field, we had certain advantages that we could apply for. And so when the whole aspect of masks and thermometers came out, instead of selling the products that we did, we started selling those products. And he said in 1 quarter, we met the entire year's budget and we didn't have to close doors. So the risk of COVID during a time where in their side of the medical industry, they couldn't really source out or sell what they would usually sell, they used it as an opportunity to obviously meet the entire year's budget. So I don't want us to be afraid of this word risk management. It has to be inculcated in the business culture, and we will get through why this is so important. So yes, Haley, if there's any questions now, before I go to the next slide, feel free.
Yeah, I think, Candice, the word risk it's almost frightening. You know, with everything that's going on in the world right now, it's, you know, we chatted earlier this week in terms of communication. So, I mean, communication is key in terms of managing the risk. So can you tell us a little bit about how, you know, you would communicate in terms of risk at this time?
Yes, so I'm speaking extensively about communication on the next slide, I think. So maybe let's get there. I just want to look at the basic supply. Let me just put this one the basic supply chain model, and I'm really keeping it simple. I think, I read an article about what businesses need to do at this dispensation of where we are with COVID, with with what's happening in Europe and in the Middle East, and how it's affecting us. Business experts and economists are saying to businesses, cut out the complexity and keep it simple. So I'm looking at a basic supply chain model for us to get back to the basics. You're starting off with your customer, you receive an order, you start doing some forecast and demand planning, then you procure what you need, you go into production planning and maintenance planning, then you're into manufacture and look into quality, and obviously at the end of it, get out. So this is your sort of basic model, internal collaboration of the business in terms of your supply chain. But obviously the crux of it, where us beloved financial people come in, is that we maintain that there's governance, risk management, and compliance at every step of the way. So those of you that are not in finance, that usually have something to say about finance people, we ensure that everything is above board. But in all of this, we're looking at effective communication and knowledge sharing. I am not speaking about anything high level here or something, scientific here. In my many years of experience doing this, I found that the key to achieving OTIF is that if we have effective communication and knowledge sharing within the ambit of the supply chain. So if I go here, again, there's lots of notes, but I want to talk about the benefits of communication and how risk management speaks to the process. We as people in supply chain, and specifically those that are looking at marketing and procuring, our basic thing now is, our main point is always about cost saving, right? Even as financial people, even you're sitting in a board meeting, the first thing you get asked is, what costs have we saved? And we spend to make money. That's a usual thing that we say. But I'm looking at when we communicate what's happening in the business to every player in the business, and every player in the business becomes the guy operating a machine, to the packer, to the person loading the truck, to the person procuring, to the person doing the plan. From whatever level, every person in the business should be communicated with, because I found that when everybody understands what is expected and what is happening, that education or knowledge sharing makes them understand how they are going to supply the next department. So there's two words I want you to keep in mind as we're going through this, is interdependence and interdepartmental SLAs, or service level agreements. Every department must be looked at either a customer or supplier. If I am in the sales department and I'm capturing an order from my client and I'm supplying that to my planning department, I am supplying to my customer the planning department. The planning department is giving it to the production manager. He is supplying his customer, the production department. The point I'm trying to say is that when we change our mindset to know that every department is a customer of us and we are the supplier, we start to get more serious about how we are supplying information to those people. So I'll give you an example. I was just yesterday with the QC department and packers in a factory. And I said to them, you've been asked to do this. Do you know what you do with this information afterwards? And they were, no, I was just told to do this. But once I started doing training and I shared knowledge, they understood that if I pack in a certain way and I don't put it on the barcode scanner correctly, and it's not scanned correctly, the number that comes up on the barcode scanner, for example, is incorrect. That number gets given to someone to manufacture that stock on the system, which is incorrect. And when it's time for me to actually dispatch, the system says no stock. I'm just giving you a basic example. But once they understood that concept, then they started, I did it in the morning, and by the time we went to the afternoon shift, we started seeing the variances come down. Now, that was over time where we developed and implemented the system about communicating to even people in the factory that are packing and are baling or doing whatever the case may be, and saying, if you understand Now, the brand awareness part of this is that we are living in a fourth industrial revolution where everything is technologically advanced and everything is futuristic, and we're talking about AI and all of these things, which means everybody has access. I think mostly everybody has access to a smartphone or some sort of internet or some sort of virtual platform. And so if I, as an employee, understand and I'm made aware what my company has done and how my processes work and what is expected from me, I'm confidently sharing that information. So instead of us incurring exorbitant costs in the business about how I can market my business and how I can put it forward, I can get someone simple that if I put them onto a, let's call it, we got a Facebook page, or we've got a LinkedIn page, or a WhatsApp group, or whatever. Employees will feel more comfortable to share because they understand. So if somebody says to them, wow, you know what, you developed a new, let's call it, you developed a new plastic bottle, for example, and they can talk about it because they understand it and they feel confident about it. So trust that your employees, once you start sharing information along, is that they'll be able to actually market your company effortlessly. The next one we're looking at is boosting our employee engagement. Listen, my most exciting time when I go on site to help businesses to develop processes and system is unfortunately not sitting with the high level managers or directors. It's when you go into operations. Why? Because the people in operations are the ones who will tell you, I know what to do. Even though there's an issue that they face or a challenge that they face, most often they actually know the solution, but they don't have a voice and they feel afraid and they feel incompetent and they feel insufficient and they feel inferior because we've not given them a platform to voice what they think that they know. So communication along every step of the way boosts the employee engagement. We're eliminating this whole mentality of a silo mentality, and we're actually boosting the morale of our staff because we're now respecting and we're giving them a hearing ear. There's a common phrase that says, I have 2 ears to hear and 1 mouth to speak. And sometimes it's very important for us to listen to what our employees are saying. Then we are encouraging and promoting and sparking innovation. Listen, through the knowledge sharing and the interdepartmental collaboration, we'll be surprised what we come up with. One of the things that I promote very strongly in a business, and actually I think Chantal Williams is also part of SAPEX. I think she's on the platform, so hi Shanti. Is that when I was based at AstraPac, she came in and she did some workshops with us about understanding and profiling each other. If anybody knows me, they know there's 2 phrases I use consistently. The one word is profiling. I know who I'm dealing with and how I must deal with them. And the next phase, which you'll see here somewhere, is return on investment, is ROI. I'm going to make decisions now on how and invest now and take the pinch now, but what is the long-term sustainability? So having these sort of platforms where we promoting innovation, brainstorming, people call them think tanks and all of that, bringing the relevant parties together. So I promote with my clients, those that are in the supply chain, to have daily meetings with each other. Now I know that's not always conducive, so some of my clients do it weekly. Further than a week, I won't recommend, because a lot can happen in a dynamic business, especially if you're a fast-paced and dynamic business. Past a week, a lot can happen. So to try and keep it weekly at most is where we're sitting and we're talking about our issues. And that's everybody included, even your maintenance team. I've got this machine that I'm going to be maintaining, so you can't run on this machine. Or the QC saying, we sent this out, but this is what came back and what went wrong. What do we need to look at? Do we need to look at our recipe? Do we need to look at our process? Do we need to look at our people? So having everybody in the same team talking the same language, again, I'm coming back to communication and knowledge sharing. Transparency is critical. We cannot manage what we cannot see. And then you'll start seeing how everybody's speaking the same language. We start listening to each other, we collaborate, and you'll be amazed some of the things that come out of that. With one of my clients, they had not done that and we implemented it. Just by doing that, within a week, we went from OTIF of 11% because no one was tracking and no one was talking, Within a week, we went from 11% to 38%, just by talking to each other, by knowledge sharing, by respecting each other, and by reporting to each other. So that was quite a successful thing that can happen when we're doing that. And then we're looking at improving our employee productivity. As we know, everybody, especially during COVID, we learned that we don't need to physically be on site for 8 or 9 hours a day. We can be productive, but it's how you manage your time. So working smarter and not harder is what we all love to do, and that we can reduce our cost per employee, and by stimulating, again, problem solving, implementing your risk management program in that, identifying, monitoring, managing, reporting, mitigating, all those words with our risk management. How do we invest our time now? What do we invest our time in to sustain us in the future? ROI. We create the culture of the knowledge sharing. We promote our teamwork and our interdependence. And lastly, with effective communication within the process, we attract our top talent. It is my personal opinion that people are the greatest assets of the business. One of my clients, he said to me, I think my raw materials is the most important thing. Yes, it is, because it's, especially with imported materials, it's quite costly, but you can import that. If you don't have anybody to effectively manage and translate that into a finished good, take it out and effectively collect the money. To me, it's not a sale until the money is in the bank. So you need the right people to do it. The model that I use in my company, I call it the 3S model. It's where I say we need the right structure in the business. The right structure in the business is not even, it's the business plan, it's the compliance that I need to have, it's the industry I'm in, is there any certifications I need? It's basically setting up, but it's really having the right ethos of the business, because everything flows from the top down. So I can go to a business and I can get buy-in from a CEO or an MD or someone senior to say, yes, Candice, please come and do this in the business. But if that person doesn't have the buy-in, it doesn't flow down, it's not going to be successful. I had such one incident for a very big company that eventually closed down. Really good company, great ideas in the company, great people, but we had sign off from the top, but the top didn't drive it down, and eventually that company actually liquidated. So we need to have the right culture in the business. And then we look at the second S, which is having the right support system. Now, again, your support is not even, let me just rephrase it. It is your customers, it is your suppliers, it's all of them. But again, it's the people within each department. So who is my support system in order for me to get my job done right? So if I am in sales, can I rely on my production team to give me information, or the planning team to give me information? Can I rely on my information on my system, on my accounting package, me running an inventory quantities report, for example? Can I rely on that? Do I have the right support structure in order to make the decisions? So having the right people is part of having the right structure and having the right support that the business needs, and which is the last S, which makes us sustainable. Again, I'm speaking about keeping it simple, taking out the complexity of it, going back to basics and saying, how can we just use these 5 points that I've spoken about effective communication within the supply chain process that will all help us to achieve the ultimate goal, which is OTIF. Haley?
Candice, yes, very, very interesting. I mean, what's coming out in a lot of what you've said is communication. So yeah. It looks like communication is key. The silo mentality of everybody doing their own thing within their silos. And in terms of, being innovative, things aren't what they used to be. So we have to take some risks, but we must manage those risks. And I think it's important what you said, manage those risks. Transparency within, the different departments. The feedback, I think feedback is very important as well, in terms of where we are currently, where do we want to be in the near future? I mean, there's lots of chaos that's going on, and how do we manage that chaos? So if there's anybody here from the group, the participants here, that have any questions, can you please pose them now? Any questions? Okay, I don't have any questions here.
Okay, I must be explaining myself very
Any
well.
other suggestions on risk management? How are you managing your risk in your business? Lerato, you running a small business currently, can you maybe give us some feedback on how you're managing your risk?
Thank you. How did I know you were gonna pick me, Haley? It just struck me. I just knew it. One thing I must say, thank you, Candice. The thing about having a small business is often we don't have the time to go and understand what a risk is. And secondly, we don't know how to identify risks. So this has actually helped me to have a definition of what actually is a risk for my business. And just my freshest thinking at the top of my head is just processes in place. So even though I'm a single ran business, there's one person in the business, but where are my processes? And as a supply chain professional myself, I must say, so embarrassing. I don't actually have those processes mapped up, and that is a risk for the business. So I think, yeah, I'm really enjoying this presentation just for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Lerato, I mean, I'm just thinking now, you've just sort of, I've had this thought. I mean, how many on this group are actually process driven? Do any of you have ISO? Okay, I'm not seeing any feedback. Well, I know, Candice, you've got, Marius. We do. Marius van der Sant. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your processes in terms of ISO and how you're managing your risk currently?
Yeah, morning, everybody.
Morning.
Yeah, but we are basically, ISO 9000, 45 and 18,000 certified. So what we basically do is we've got internal auditing teams auditing the business in general, and then we also do our ISO accreditation, our ISO audits every year, once a year, and then we also do financial audits from our financial auditors once a year. So people sometimes feel that they're getting audited to death, but that's the way that we do it. So typically, as ISO requires, every process that you do that makes sense, you need to document it to make sure that you do what you document and you document what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think from my side as a supply chain professional, I think visibility, involvement, visibility, trying to do proper governance and compliance in your procurement department is quite a particular challenge normally, to get the right people to do the buying. To get those type of things in place is normally quite a challenge. I think, especially in an involving environment, like I would say, I'm not sure if South Africa is really unique, but I think in a place where we are, where supply chain is basically very new, the focus wasn't very much on supply chain in the past, so companies are now starting to realize the benefit of that, and then so more and more you need to get the focus and the control into the right areas. Let people make decisions where they need to happen, instead of waiting for top management or top-down driven decisions to be made.
And Marius, in response to what you're saying, it's so critical because this is the idea of ensuring that we're creating a risk management culture. It's a matter of saying, no matter who you are in the business, we give you the opportunity to identify a risk. And a risk, as you're saying, I think previously the mentality is that risk management is for managers or supervisors or people high up there, but anybody in the business can really identify a risk. Again, I say this, someone who in operations is always without us knowing every day. I mean, we drive on the road. We are risk managers on the road because we are taking calculated risks on when we need to indicate and how we need to change a lane. Everything is involved in risk management. We're looking at our environment. We're looking at how we can better make choices and decisions. And that's basically what risk is.
Yeah, I do agree. I think every person, and we work in a chemical manufacturing environment, so every person needs to be risk, well, do a task assessment for every task. So they identify risk, mitigate the risk, make a call on it. I think from a supply chain and finance works as a team.
Yes.
Typically, so the one supports the other.
Yeah.
Although supply chain is a middleman for operations in this case. So the guy in the plant will typically do more risk identification from a safety, for an example, a safety viewpoint, where supply chain would look at finance, governance, contracts, those types of things, fraud, preventing fraud in conjunction with finance. So I think to us that's quite I'd say a challenge, but that's our daily task to make sure that we do improve on what we have daily. So yeah, and I think one of the drives that we really have is empowerment, making sure that the accountability is where it belongs.
Yeah.
People take ownership of what they do, be accountable for what they do, but also give them the freedom of making decisions within the parameters of their environment. Yeah.
Maurice, just a question. I'm just thinking, you know, we've traditionally just left everything to the check department in terms of managing risk. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, to be honest, I've never been used to such a culture, so I cannot really comment on that. Where we are is every person forms literally as a chain in a supply chain, as we call it. So it's in your interest to make sure that the task gets done and gets done in the right way. There's no walking with blinders. So yeah, to be honest, I cannot answer. I cannot imagine myself in a place where people will say it's not my problem. You know, it's not my job to check this. I'll leave it to the next guy.
And I like that word accountability. You know, there's a difference between responsibility and accountability. Responsible is what I'm ultimately given in my job description to do, but accountability is me saying that I'm going to do what it takes for all of us to win. So, you know, accountability is never where it says it's not in my job description. I'm going to do it nonetheless.
Yeah, and also silo mentality, I think, is also normally a hindrance to these types of things where you say, you know, it's not my job, or I leave it to the next guy to check, and I'm just checking my part, or I don't really care about anything else than the transaction that I need to do. So looking at it from a process viewpoint instead of a transactional viewpoint, knowing the impact of my late delivery instead of it's not my work to check if the deliveries are on time, but knowing my contribution towards the process itself. I think on the other side of what we also rely heavily, I think, on education, making sure people get educated. In our supply chain, we endorse the CPIM entry level qualification, the APEX CPIM. So to me, that provides a broader view for people, even on the plant, to know exactly where they fit in the process and what they affect.
Haley, if I can, I implement a model sometimes in a business, which I like to call the WUK principle, WUK, but I'll start from the bottom. The K is for knowledge. I can have all the knowledge, but that doesn't make, you know, you hear this, that you park yourself in a garage. I mean, you you sit in a garage, it doesn't necessarily make you a car, right? So you can have all this knowledge, which is just information in my hands. But when I go to the U, which is understanding, I start to comprehend that knowledge. And then we go to the W, which is on the top, which is wisdom, because I know how to apply that knowledge and that understanding. So to what Marius is saying is that education, as I spoke about, having employee engagement, training, workshopping, innovation talks, giving people the right tools in order to do their stuff, transparency, knowledge sharing. This is all part of the communication skill about how we will empower each other. I was going to say this, and when I was going to talk about return on investment, is that when I was previously in manufacturing, we would close the business or communicate to our customers and suppliers and close up the business for 2 to 3 days. I think it might have been 2 days, where the entire business comes together in a business process flow workshop. Now, I try to tell some clients, let's do that, because I think that will be critical for you to help your business. And, I get told often that we would not survive if we have to close this business for a day or two, because it's such a dynamic business. And I get that. But I look at the whole concept again on return on investment. If I closed off the business for 2 days and I educated my entire company about each person's process and job, and give them an opportunity to ask the questions, educate them, enlighten them, the transparency is there, what would that do for my business the other 363 days in a year?
Candice, I have a question from Caden.
Yes.
To everyone. Hi there, what's the suggestion you have to get individuals to stop working in silos? How do you make people realize that if one person in the team is failing, then essentially the whole team is failing? And so teamwork and communication are incredibly important. How do you get these people to realize this?
So that is like the crux of this entire presentation, which is such a critical question. And I'm going to speak back to the point of when I start with businesses first, I start, again, we can do the high level where I just spoke about the business decides it's taking a day or half a day, however complicated the process is or how complex or long-winded it is. And, you could have, like Lerato saying, she's a single person. I'm also a single person in the business offering a service. So obviously, who would I talk to? But if I have my business partners that I affiliate with, it might be a very short meeting. But if I have a manufacturing business, for example, it's a lengthy process. So I might start on a higher scale to say, I'll get all the people in the business and I will have a process flow mapped out to say, from the time I start with sales till the time I collect the money in the bank, this is what our process looks like. If there's a break in the chain, let's say at the point of quality control, these are the repercussions that could happen. We are sending out a defective good, which we only might find out after the fact because my quality management system was not in place. And this is the consequence. One of the things we effectively did was in manufacture, and we know this, is that you'll always have the aspect of waste and scrap, right? So we had this big screen in the production, in the factory, and as finance people, we would take what the returns was in terms of stuff that could not be salvaged and resold and stuff that we'd had to discard as damaged. And at the end of the month, we would translate that to a rand value, and whatever the cost is, we'd put a picture up on the screen to say to people, that's how much you cost the business. It's equivalent to a vehicle, because it was 120 or 150,000 rand or whatever, however we want to display it. We need to start becoming visible. I think Maria said that word again, visible. We need to be transparent. So one of the other ways you can do it is what I said with the supply chain team. So I've got the production team, QC, maintenance, sales, logistics, for example. Maybe I got someone from finance, maybe I got someone from health and safety, maybe I got a dedicated risk person, and we meet once a week for half an hour, once a week, or an hour once a week. And we lay down all our cards on the table and say, I was not able to do this because there was a mold change or there was a color change and nobody communicated to me. Because of this, the plan went off and I told my customer I was going to deliver today, but I couldn't deliver today. This is what happened because we did not communicate the change in the plan. So these are the various forums in which we can actually show. And then there's the one-on-ones, like I said, I did with the QC team. Have the QC team, do you know what you're doing with this information? Do you know if you don't give it in this way on time, this is what happens there? And I think also one of the things I promote when I tell the supply chain to meet together is take a walk and have your meeting in different departments. Have your meeting in production today. Have your meeting in the warehouse today. Have your meeting in the sales office today. Go in the other person's environment and see what's happening in their space. Look at the warehouse. It's overflowing. Maybe you need to stop a machine. We're overrunning the machine. So look at what's happening, because we tend, again, to stay in our silo. I'm in a valley mentality. I can only see what I can see in my space. So these are the various forums in which we can mitigate that silo mentality.
Sorry. So what I'm hearing is we need to all be aware of the impact it's having down the line.
Sure.
In terms of what we are doing, how's it going to impact the business at the end of the day? So that mentality in terms of it's not my job. How's that going to impact at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've had the scenario where, as a finance person, I'm reporting numbers, and I had the production manager say to me, the day you can run my factory, talk to me. I had the logistics team say, the day you can pack my truck and get it on time, come and talk to me. So for lack of a better word, we need to stop being lazy about what we're doing in the business. I got off my butt and I went into the warehouse and I went into the factory and I took a print out of raw materials and I went to the factory manager and the planner and I said, explain it to me and teach it to me. That's why I speak about having the right people. In as much as we can have all the tools in the world, if you don't have the right people do it. Now, I'm not at all advocating for you guys to fire people. Please don't take that. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying let's educate our people. Let's train them. Let's get them to the place where we all having one vision and we all speaking the same language.
Yeah, Candice, the one thing that comes to mind in terms of the culture of the business, I mean, if you're not allowed to, I mean, if you're so risk adverse, you're not allowed to fail. How do you manage that in terms of, your people, your human capital?
What, failure?
Failure in business. Are you allowed to learn through failure?
I think we need to define what failure is. My diary in front of me is a quote by Thomas Edison, and I'll quote it. It says, many of life's failures are people who didn't realize how close they were to success before they gave up. I think people have a mentality of what failure is. And I always try to encourage people that if you make a mistake, own up to it. Say I made a mistake and let's fix it together. I think, to me, failure is when someone doesn't want to own up to what's happening and we want to blame shift. I think that's the biggest failure in a business, the culture of blame shifting. But when I take, again, I'm using the word accountability and say, listen, I did something, we made a mistake, how can we fix it up? I think there's a level of respect for someone who can come up and say, I made a mistake. So I think we need to define what failure is. Again, I think that would be, there's no cut and chase sort of thing that this is what failure is. I think we need to define it. And one of the things I do, and I find lacks in businesses, I hope it's not with anybody in this forum, is there's a lack of commendation for people when they achieve. Now, I am such a personality that I am not driven by money, I am driven by affirmation. I work better when someone affirms me. So you all can clap your hands now and say, well done, because it's certain people are driven by certain things. And very often I go to a business and I'm almost like the business external therapist, because you hear people say, we don't even get a thank you. We don't even get an acknowledgement. So if you're in a managerial position That's one of the best ways to drive, is to affirm when something goes well. If we only concentrate and be critical about the things that go wrong, you're going to make for a very discouraged person, and they don't want to do better. But when we affirm, and when we, I think, again, I'm going to talk about Chantel when they did world-class manufacturing for us. It's the word recognition and rewards. I think they used that example of companies that would go into the factory one day and, you know, take a star or take a hat and put it on the guy and say, your line made the most amount of money this month or this week. What it's going to do to the guy? There's a sense of pride. I did my work and someone recognized it. So I think more leaning towards, let's talk about failures. If we talk about wins, we might get more positive out of that.
Yeah, so basically catching people doing things right versus catching people doing things wrong.
Yeah, and when they do it wrong, if they own up, we can fix it.
Yeah. Anybody in the audience today want to say anything?
I see Marius's hand is up.
Marius.
Hi, yeah. I just want to add to that. What we typically do is, as part of our HR can say program at the company, if we do that disc profiling, whereby people will go through that program to identify your personality type, identify your strengths and weaknesses, get that on record, and have the people to know and understand the differences between ourselves in a team. That typically helps you to see how you can work together much closer, how to handle people, how to handle your colleague, to know that if a person reacts in a certain way, that it's probably not personal, but part of his characteristics or makeup. And then maybe and another angle is we also got a program whereby every person, if like you mentioned earlier, has a responsibility to identify risk. And this is more from a safety viewpoint, but you can actually, I think, apply it anywhere, is to say an anonymous reporting system whereby a person or each and every individual has a responsibility to identify a particular issue, but to report it, to make sure that we get a good picture of the culture of the company, get a good idea of where the problem areas is. But part of that is not to keep it to yourself. The responsibility on the reviewer is to create awareness, go and speak to that person. Tell him, I see that you're at risk here, or I see that you are missing the following. But then record it anonymously so that people are not feeling victimized. So as a result, they would go and attend to that particular area, and management or safety, whoever are involved in the process, depends on what it is, have a good idea of where they need to focus if some things are getting worse or better. And then also to applaud people for good progress.
Marius, I hear you and Haley use the word, usually in a business, we'd expect the SHUC team to be the ones that identify and pick up on risks, because we're looking at something like health and safety, fire, quality, building regulations, or whatever the case may be. So they pick up on this. They have the risk registers, they liaise with the insurers when the surveys come up, external, internal audits. But, you know, when we have a risk management framework, and now we're building up our framework, one risk could usually lead to another risk that might be more catastrophic when we're plotting now probability and consequence on our risk registers. For example, if I am in the food industry and I'm producing packaging that is in the food industry, so I have a ISO 22000 or BRC accreditation, and it tells me I need to do X, Y, and Z. Otherwise, I can't supply my customer. So I've done that. So it's a critical part that I cannot contaminate that packaging. Otherwise, there could be, you know, serious consequences for the business. So I now put in some material or ink or master batch in, and it contaminated that. From the SHUC team point of view, they might look at it as a quality risk sort of thing, like they're looking at quality risk. But how contaminated that packaging went out and who it went to could become a business reputational risk, could be a loss of client risk. So I've lost that part of the business. So can you see how one can fall in? We can get very complex here, as I said, but we need to know that every part of the business, again, if we are educated our people, we've given the opportunity to everybody to identify the risk, we can mitigate this at every point in the business process so that we don't land up with more serious risks in the business. Responsibility and accountability, transparency, knowledge sharing. We're coming back to the same thing all the time. I want to, Kaylee, if possible, go to the next slide. So I know it's important what we're speaking about. What's going on with my button now? Okay, so I'm back here and I want to just talk about knowledge sharing, right? I know, especially when you come into corporate environment, we could easily get, say, listen, we bombarded with meetings and bombarded with reporting, and it just becomes a lot. But I just want to give you some knowledge sharing that we can do that maybe you haven't identified yet. So when I'm talking about how we're going to get OTIF, I want to list some of the things that I speak to businesses and ask them, do they have in place that could help them with knowledge sharing and communicating? So you don't have to necessarily be sitting in a meeting for this, especially in the COVID environment where we're working from home, we're online, and sometimes we have to have Teams meetings or Zoom meetings. We could use this sort of reports to help us with knowledge. So from a customer point of view, are we looking at our pipeline reports, sales order reports, back order reports? Are we using an effective customer relation management system? Are we looking at our margin reports to effectively see our costings, our profitability, what type of category of product is more profitable than the other? What is it doing? So are we looking at these type of reports? Specifically, the back order report will drive a lot in terms of the supply chain meetings or production planning meetings on how we're going to look to rework our plan or change our plan in order to meet our back order, because the back order is going to speak to the OTIF, right? Not sure what's happening with my button. Right. And then we're looking at our forecast and demand planning. Again, we're looking at trend analysis. If we're a business that keeps consignment or safety stock, we need to continuously look at that. We need to be looking at our inventory quantities. From a procurement point of view, do we have MRP, so materials requirements planning? Again, is our material imported? How does that affect us in terms of exchange rate in the markets, our stock levels? Do we do job costing in terms of our procurement and our planning? Specifically, supplier relations. One of the articles that I read this morning is saying that in the supply chain world, we need to look at, funny enough, sustainability in the business to strong supplier relationships and risk management. So this is just a perfect presentation today that we're speaking about how we can cement our supplier relationships, have the trust and the reliability on them, secure group pricing, or have a preferred supplier vetting and all of that stuff. So those things are important. The production planning and maintenance planning, again, safety stock, what's our minimum maximum stock levels when we are at our peak, or whether we're off peak, seasonal, those sort of things. Constantly looking at inventory quantities. I can't stress enough how important it is to have a system that gives us an accurate stock level at any time. It's critical. So for me, if you ask me, the most critical part, and I'm not saying it's the most important job, but the most critical part that gives us the most amount of information is when we're looking at planning within the cycle, because that's really going to drive quite a lot here. So then on the production planning, we're looking at work centers and OEEs. That's your equipment efficiencies, your overall equipment efficiencies. Am I running it on that machine? Do I get maximum out of that machine because it's a newer machine? The cycle time is faster. The downtime is shorter. I get better quality on that. I can get more output in that. Are we looking at these things? Do we actually just account for just materials in this work center, or are we taking in operational expenses? Am I including repairs and maintenance? Am I including electricity? Am I including rent? Am I including a portion of my direct labor? Am I including depreciation on my assets? So we can go, I know I'm getting a little bit more into it, but these are things we need to start looking at in the whole cycle. From the manufacturer's point of view, how well am I counting and recording? Am I doing a manual system? There's always room for error in a manual. It could be a very tight manual system, but do I have automation? Do I have barcoding? Under quality control, do I do spec testing? So do I run something through machine and say the first 10 units or 1,000 units, whatever it might be, is it to spec? Is the spec next to the machine? Is there a recipe that's in the machine that's mixing up the recipe? Whatever it might be, am I doing my quality control at that point? Who's data capturing that information? Who's checking the variances? What quality management system I have during the production cycle? Then we're looking at your warehouse and logistics. Do I have a proper warehouse management system? Maybe a scanning system, and how the SOPs fall into that. Do I have bin locations that helps me to identify whether I'm keeping my minimum maximum stock levels, and whether it's easily identifiable for stock takes? All of these mitigate the whole thing about theft. Is there lot traceability? When did I produce it? The first in, first out sort of thing, or is it last in, first out? COCs, how can I generate accurate COCs because of this? What's my logistics plan? How do I plan my logistics? Do I plan to run to dispatch 5 trucks a day, but they're going willy-nilly, or do I have a proper plan that I'm dispatching to Pietermaritzburg today, or I'm dispatching to Sandton today, whatever the case may be, or I'm doing it over the border? How is it working? What paperwork's in place? And then you got, again, the finance people at every crux in point, looking at the GRC, the governance, the risk management, compliance. Is everything accounted for on an accounting ERP system or accounting system? But preferably, if you're manufacturing, you want to be in an ERP system. Is there incident reporting? So again, as Marius was saying, at every point in time, we've got someone documenting what the risks are, and there needs to be investigation. You get very good risk and compliance software. I'm an affiliate for software called Rapid Global Software. I don't know if anybody heard about it, but I sell and train on this risk and compliance software, because you can identify a risk, report it, investigate it, do workflow management, so it sends an alert to someone to say something's happening. And you can also do things like your maintenance on it. So I'm on an app on my phone, for example, and I'm QR scanning the machine, and the machine, I create a task to say machine breakdown, need X, Y, and Z, and I assign it to someone. Then are we looking at CapEx and budgets? What do the business need? What are the budgets? How are the variance analysis to the budgets? Self-audits, very important. Before you come to an external audit, what can we do internally for internal and self-audits, and drop checklists for ourselves? Again, the SHERP team does that very good, but we can do it from a finance point of view. We can do it from a sales point of view. We can do it from a procurement point of view. What are all the requirements I need to do? And then critical, standard operating procedures. Do I understand the standard operating procedures of the business? Is it aligned to the business? Is it aligned to interdepartmental SLAs? Am I talking the same language? Am I delivering to the department what they want? And what's my process? What's their process? What's my process? How can we bridge the gap? So these are some of the reports that I would go into business or SOPs or policies and controls, and see whether the business actually has this in order to see that they're going to successfully meet OTIF. Any questions around that? I know we're out of time, but is there a question?
Candice, we are running a little bit out of time. So yeah, if you want to maybe finish off with your last slide.
So basically, OTIF doesn't have to be a very flowery thing. You can have, some business might have all the tools and the finance to get something automated, but I I simply do for clients something like this. I dump into Excel of the accounting system, the back order report, and then you put a simple formula to say, what was supposed to be my delivery date? When did I capture that order? What's today's date? How many days am I overdue? And therefore I will work out my days overdue versus, or how many, in this case, it's how many orders were overdue versus all the orders that were there. And therefore my OTIF is that percentage. And OTIF effectively, I've seen so many people say this when we talk OTIF, you should never accept an OTIF percentage under 90%, really not. So basically, what I wanted to say here is that I sort of thought that it is an extensive thing. So if you want to consult further with me, please send me an email and use that code when you're sending me an email, and we can book a free consult, or if we need to engage further. But if you have any other questions, but thank you for listening, and I hope you've added value today.
Thank you, Candice. A big thank you, actually. And yeah, just to say, you know, in these times we are going through a lot of risk, and it's nice to know that we can have the support from SAPEX and from SAPEX members like yourselves, who are also in new business, in small business. And yeah, just want to say thank you.
Great.